Hello, my fellow Pew People. It's football season in the South, and 'tis the season to wear our favorite team apparel, avoid our rival team neighbors and family members, and like me last Sunday, miss Sunday service. So my playing hooky from church, as well as Reverend Gibson having a bye week from the pulpit this Sunday, I dug through the Pulpit to Pew vaults and unearthed some unused show tape and found some relevant instant replays. Yes, a lot of bad puns in this, and I apologize for it, but I can't help myself. And in this tape, there's a personal confession from myself or a personal foul. Okay, that's the last pun, I promise. With my struggles of prioritizing the bigger things in life and allowing those uncontrollable external and small things to get in the way of me being the best version of myself, which is the one that doesn't sound like a person in the way of Christ, but actually acts that way. Yeah, it's the one that doesn't embarrass himself in front of his sweet and wonderful grandmother. Sorry about last Iron Bowl Grandma. I really am. Sorry. I hope you enjoyed this candid conversation between parishioner and priest. Actually, Beverly, Reverend Gibson, and I have been doing this show for 2.5 years, and we have really developed a off-the-mic friendship. Well, I think so. It's kind of hard. Beverly is so wonderfully nice everywhere I've ever seen her. So, I really consider her a very trusted friend and a voice, and not just my, priest and spiritual Sherpa. And the reason I say that is because this conversation really gets in this idea of what I love about podcasts. My favorite podcasts are the shows that feel more like, that they feel like a personal and interesting conversation over a meal or wine, conversations that you want to eavesdrop on when you're sitting next to a couple talking, or a very interesting conversation at the table next to you at a restaurant or a bar. Okay, so the title of this podcast is a little cheeky, College Football versus Church, but there are some very big issues we talk about in this episode. We talk about Scripture, the role of the church, dealing with our neighbors, and walking the Christian talk. Everybody have a great football season, and let's all remember that some things are bigger than mascots and school ties, team slogans, and bitter rivalries. Saturday it's for team colors and a whole lot of fun. But we should always remember that we're on the same team on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But we're on the same team. Everybody enjoy the show.
Welcome to Pulpit to Pew, a podcast that features a conversation between priest and parishioner. The Very Reverend Beverly Gibson, Dean of Christ Church Cathedral, and Johnny Gwynn, a newcomer to the Episcopal family, discuss what Beverly intended and Johnny heard, or got wrong.
That informs our action, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking before we began, and I said, one of the questions about Buddhism is, what's with all this sitting? Why sit? I mean, what does that do? But the answer to that is that the process of the sitting is to eliminate ego, so that action can be in accord with the needs of the universe and not with your own ego distortion, right? And the same is true in the Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. How do we get our own bias, our own ignorance, our own will to power out of the way so that we can do the gospel, so that we can proclaim the gospel truly,
right,
and share God's love with the world? Well, those things have to get out of the way first. Well,
the funny thing is we have the armor of God, which it's not letting anything in, but it's also not letting anything out as well. So you have to be careful with, again, metaphors, and it's very wonderful language.
It's a great one, though.
Yeah, it is. Of course, the helmet and the shield, but the sword is the Scripture, which
right,
is, you fight with that. The shield is to defend yourself. That's precautionary. But to go forward to strike is the Scripture, which is, again, it's a mixed message, right? Because Scripture is this peace, love, turn the other cheek. Well, New Testament is. Old Testament, not so much. But the idea is that sword is a striking thing. It is a weapon.
Well, and some people use it that way. And let's be honest. And back to your question about what turns young people off or what turns other people off. People who start quoting Scripture at you and banging you over the head with it, and proof texting, lifting verses out of this place or that place or the other place for a particular purpose, that's a huge turnoff.
Yeah.
And yet there are places in the church where that's been seen as appropriate training.
Right.
And the way things ought to be done.
How to answer something back when someone asks you a question. Well, here's the trigger right back to give you this quote right here.
Right, without real thought. And as we've said
discerning
before.
But that's not discerning.
Right, but discerning, right, which was part of what we're talking about here, involves a genuine and deep relationship with the Scripture,
Right.
also with tradition, and also with the use of one's own reason, right? And there's the Anglican way for you, that sort of threefold thread that makes, I think, things stronger.
So what are those three things again?
Scripture, tradition, reason.
Okay, and I want to add one more to that.
Okay.
You got to live up to it, because I don't want to have somebody tell me all that and they do the exact opposite.
Right.
That's what turns me away. The minute I sit there and you kind of put somebody on a pedestal sometimes too at that teaching level, right? And they give you all this spun gold wisdom, right? That you think you're being enlightened on something, and then all of a sudden you realize that person doesn't even live up to their teachings. That would crush me.
Well, I hope you're not talking about me.
No, I'm also 47 years old.
I know.
I've had some moments, and I've done it myself. I've not lived,
Right.
I've not walked the talk. And then when someone points it out, I used to try to defend myself, and now I turn around and say, you know what? You're so right.
Well, and we do have to do that. That's part of the process.
Thank you for pointing that out to me, is where I am now.
Well, and your fourth thing is really engagement. How do you live it? And that's really what Bishop Curry's talking about when he talks about making disciples to go out into the world. And that's a question that we constantly have to ask ourselves. And that's a part of discernment. Am I really doing my job? Am I really living as I ought to live? Because it's so easy to fall into patterns. It's so easy to get defensive, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to doubt yourself, right?
Or stick up for your team because it's your team.
Right.
Because, again, we talked about denominations, right? Like, it's okay to say, hey, my group is not doing it as well as somebody else, but don't think your way is the best way just because you wear the blue shirt and the other team wears the green shirt.
Right.
I mean, I see a lot of that. And look, Alabama and Auburn are starting. Football is starting this weekend, and we are going to see actual true colors in the way people think. But football has nothing to do with the idea of dealing with each other and something like the idea of spiritual and everlasting life. It's a much more different and bigger issue.
Oh, you mean football is?
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I know. It does get quite confusing about these things we let in our lives.
Well, and I have to tell you, this is, we have one of those public calendars on the website,
Yes.
And, of course, the internal calendar is also electronic, and it's got all these different levels and layers to it, and you click the part that gets shared publicly. And somebody came in and said, why is the Alabama and Auburn football schedule on your calendar? It's like, oops, we didn't mean to put that out there. But we keep it on the internal because you're not going to plan anything that's successful that runs counter
like
to the football
Thanksgiving.
schedule.
I mean, it's like Christmas. That Alabama-Auburn game is, that a lot of people will be traveling. And, you don't put the church celebration on that weekend. In this part of the world, you don't get married on these weekends.
No, well, it's a deal weekend if you can schedule around it. I have because I've done a wedding on the day of the Alabama-Auburn
It's a fire sale at Christ Church Cathedral last weekend in November.
They got a deal.
All you November brides out there, keep that in mind.
As long as you don't expect anybody to be at your wedding, it's going to be fine.
Or you have to have a 96-inch TV like at the service and at the reception.
Well, that's kind of what these folks did. I
Yeah.
mean, they set it up so the wedding happened before the game,
Right.
and then they had big screen, and
Logistics.
the reception was basically football food.
So I will reveal something.
Okay.
I'm obsessive. I know that part of makes me interesting and also dangerous at the same time. Because of me reading the news about Alabama football, I became quite obsessive about it because it was a hobby. And then I got to the point where it was taking over most of my time. I was obsessing on it. And then when we lost, even though it's been very few lost in the last 10 years, I overreacted in that feeling. And for something that really is not, it's supposed to be an escape, and yet I end up making it something that ends up becoming my own private little small hell.
Well, it's supposed to be, as they say, a sport and a pastime, and yet it's not a joke when people say it's a religion. I mean, it ruins kind of like a
loss
religion.
ruins whole weekends and weeks for people. I mean, I was one of those people.
Well, I can chart it by attendance. I can tell you.
Yeah.
If Alabama happens to lose, people take to their covers and they are not in church
You
on
think
Sunday
you'd
morning.
be praying to save us for next week.
Yep.
So what I had to do is I had to realize I had to think about why I was embarrassing myself in front of my grandmother. That was the thing that I dropped some.
That's so
bad.
sad.
It
John.
is, and I'm not that person. I'm not that person. People saw things in me that they know me, but then see me in a different way during that time. So I realized that the losing was worse to me than all the winning, and that scared me very badly. That's a terrible way to look at things, and I had to back off to the point where I had to do. I had to quit reading so much. I'm not balanced. I'm balancing now. I had to, like an alcoholic, I had to quit drinking.
Right, had to detox.
After Alabama lost to Auburn last year, by the way, I knew the game so much, I knew we would lose by the middle of the third quarter by watching the game. And I actually told everybody what was going to happen. And I left. And they're like, "You're such a bad fan." And then Stacy came back and said, "How did you know it was going to exactly get?" I said, "I read and see too much for 20 years. And I said, "I left before I lost control." But I didn't watch the other games when we won the national championship. I didn't even watch those games because I knew I had to get some
perspective,
level out my life and say, if I want to keep doing this, and that's how I spend time with my parents. I spend time with my family on Saturdays watching Alabama football. And that should be what I look forward to, and not outcomes of strangers on TV.
Well, you do have a point. I will not ever take on a crusade against college football. I mean,
that's just not good marketing.
I might be a fool for Christ, but I'm not that big a fool. It's just, I'm not going to win that one. Nobody's going to win that.
No one's winning it.
But that's a great illustration of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it can be anything. But for most of us, it tends to be those things that are so readily available on a screen in front of us. The news, of course, being one. And we're always in a moment of lots of things going on.
Crisis of now. Yeah.
But we have so much unfettered, unfiltered access to the worst of it. And I suppose the question really is, why is it that we give so much of our attention to these things that are so despicable and dire?
We know that's bad for us, yet
right, and we're drawn to it.
Are we drawn to darkness? I mean, is that? Because look, my humor tends to go very gallows humor, and I'm sure there's a lot of psychology behind all that. But boy, am I drawn to that. Just, I'm not talking weirdo, but it's mostly like Monty Python. I mean, but there's a huge, I don't feel super weird because some of the biggest movies out there is this dark humor that I'm drawn to. But Stacy has brought up the fact of like, I'm not quite sure why you think this is funny, but I'm just drawn to this otherworldly part. That's not my world. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to it. It's because it's the upside down, like on Stranger Things. Right. It is something so different than what I'm seeing that's what I'm drawn to, is the curiosity of like, that is nothing like my life.
Well, I think that it's one thing when we're talking about entertainment that presumably we have some boundaries around, right?
Well, right. It's fiction. It's
right.
It's escape. That's escape.
And there are lots of psychological and emotional reasons behind our attraction to that, and it's a way of working on things and dealing with things. And I'm certainly not going to say that's bad, but I think it's the bad behavior and the crude expression that is now so normative out there everywhere that has seeped into how we see each other and how we treat each other.
Are you saying that because we are getting so focused and so angry at each other on things that are like literally with our next door neighbors that matter with us?
Right.
Like,
yes.
It's not even like what I keep saying is like we're talking politics here. I know we are, right? Cultural things and politics.
We are. But it gets down to
it's not even policy anymore. It is like that's what I said, shirts and teams. You wear blue, I wear red. That means you're all wrong and I'm all right. And nowhere in between.
But it's affecting how our children are educated. Well, but it's affecting their access to education. Yeah. It's affecting our health care. It's affecting all sorts
critical
of things.
Thinking.
Basic things about the way we live and care for one another, or ensure that people have the quality of life that they ought to have in the United States of America.
Yeah, because we can't have conversations anymore.
And we're squandering any kind of real conversation about that through this sort of dreck.
And I got to say, talk about going away, it has made me go away. And I was libertarian before, and I've said that since 2006. I mean, that kind of drove me there then, and I was looking for something different. But I found the same. It's very interesting to hear those things, but it has its own set of problems as well. And I'm the outsider on the outside in. But now I'm at a point where, like, I don't want to do any of this because it is affecting me. I am letting in so much of that. And the thing is, I just said, I'd rather just walk away from all of it and maybe find this space that Marcus Aurelius talked about. Create more space to think of these bigger issues, not these daily issues, because I need to find more of what's inside of me, not what is bothering me or frustrating me, but what I am about.
Right. And that's a very interesting counter move to what we're seeing. And to take this back to the church, my sense is that people come to church to get away from that, not to enter some kind of fantasy
get away from
land.
Politics.
Right. Not to enter
and inner fighting and culture.
Not right.
Okay.
Not to enter some fantasy land where everything is great and, la la la.
Yeah.
But to come to a place where they sense that there is some real grappling with real spiritual issues. And with those forces of good, of evil, of what's right, of how do we act, and yet they're not being told what to think and what to do at that kind of minute level and that level of personal judgment. I think church, it should be transformative over time. The hope is that in the hymns, in the prayers, in the scripture, in the sermon, there are some things that do stick. And when you go out into the world, into the rest of your life during the week, some part of that goes with you and you think about it. It's not that it tells you what to do, but it becomes a part of your awareness and a part of what you bring to your life. So that there really is, there is some meditation on it that happens as it goes around in your consciousness during the week. But it is meant, and we're going back to Michael Curry now, to be something that empowers you, right? That somehow or other transforms, invigorates, charges you for something about living in a more gospel-oriented way.
You mentioned that it's a call to be like a school.
Right.
School for Lord's Church. If you'd like to know more about Beverly Gibson and Christ Church Cathedral, please visit christchurchcathedralmobile.org. There you'll find information on the church, Reverend Beverly Gibson's recorded sermons, and sermon notes. If you want to know more about Johnny and his Sabbadoodles, visit pulpittopew.com. I would also like to thank Deep Fried Studios and producer Stacey Wellborn. Without her, this show would not get made. If you have any comments, likes, dislikes, please send information to Stacey at deepfriedstudios.com. Everyone have a great day, and thanks for listening.